Hello, and welcome to What the Denmark, the show that explains things that seem peculiar as an outsider in Denmark. I'm Sam.
And I'm Josefine. Each episode will discuss a new topic, talk to experts, and try to understand why something so normal in Denmark is confusing to foreigners. Despite living abroad for many years, I'll be giving the inside view of Danish culture.
And as you can probably tell from my accent, I'm originally from the UK, and so we'll be giving the outsider view of the country. Our ultimate goal is to resolve cultural confusion in Denmark. This show is just one part of that mission, and so stick around to the end to hear about how you too can be involved. This week, we're talking about Danes in the workplace. A common thing people hear about Denmark is the flat hierarchies.
Walk into a meeting room and you can't spot who the boss is. CEOs and interns cycle to work together and everyone is expected to contribute to conversations. In cultural theory, this is known as having a low power distance.
We discuss the roots of this workplace egalitarianism compared to, say, Southern Europe or East Asian cultures that are much more hierarchical.
We talk with management author Chris Shern about the pros and cons of the lower power distance in both business and broader society.
Nico Blier-Silvestri, a French manager who has worked in Copenhagen and around the world for many years.
And Josefine Bols, a Danish architect who had some interesting anecdotes from her time working in Japan.
Keep listening to learn how the Danish/Nordic management style is perceived internationally.
What outsiders find difficult about this management style.
Tips for non-Danes and Danes to integrate.
And why our guests think Danish style is something the whole world needs to start adopting in the future. First, let's meet the two main guests we had in making this episode.
My name is Chris Shern. I'm the managing director of the IME Foundation and the Henley Business School in the Nordics.
So my name is Nico. I'm French, and I've been lucky enough for the past 8 years to be able to work in the startup community in Copenhagen.
When I spoke with both Chris and Nico, I asked them to explain how the management style in Denmark differs from elsewhere. Both of them gravitated to this idea of trust. As Chris describes,
the foundations of that is trust. You don't, build a flat hierarchical organization if you don't have trust in your corporate culture. So it is many elements, but as a foundation, and that's also what we see in the Danish society and the Scandinavian Nordic societies, is there's a high level of trust in society.
We then began exploring what trust means in practice.
I trust that, number one, you can do your job, but I trust that I can communicate with you. And of course, I'm not the one that's in a position of power to take the decision. I'm still allowed to voice my opinion. And again, from personal experience working outside of Denmark in many, many countries, many places, that's not what you see a lot.
For Nico, this fittingly began when he was at Trustpilot, a company in Denmark in 2012. The company had 30 employees and needed to professionalize how they hired.
Nico saw the job advert, called the CEO, went for a coffee that afternoon, and started the next day. Despite this,
I think the big learning curve was the 100% trust from the start. Like, you come in, we trust you. I mean, we hired you, we trust you to do something.
He acknowledges that he was working with a startup that are already flat organizations and can make quick decisions. But nevertheless, this sense of trust was a shock.
It's both empowering and very scary. Yeah. Right? When you come from a very structured environment, it's both empowering because like the French ego kicks in and saying, of course you trust me, I'm good at this, I can do it. And it's both scary saying like, okay, now I actually need to make it happen. I think this is the very positive thing about trust is that, okay, you trust me, I want to not disappoint you.
Seriously, what do you think about this? So trust from the beginning.
Yeah, of course, I take trust from the beginning for granted because I have grown up in Denmark. And so I would expect that since I was very young, my parents expected that I would do the right thing because there is that trust-based culture. So for me, it wouldn't be scary to go into an environment like that. However, I would be very careful what I promise in an interview situation. And I suppose I have experienced being overwhelmed by a task, but not by what I was entrusted. How about you?
So just quick, how do you mean, like, to not be overwhelmed by being entrusted? What does that mean?
Yeah, one thing is that people expect you to do your very best. Another thing is, are you able to do what's required of you? And I think they're two different things. And I think that maybe that is what people coming to Denmark connect too closely. Because I think, of course, if you promise too much and you're not able to deliver, then you have an issue. But you would have had an issue either way. But trust is a different thing. It's people trusting that you will do your very best and that you will own your project.
Yeah, I mean, I've had work experience or like times working somewhere where, there's that initial, okay, I still need to kind of feel you out a bit, and I'm not going to, for example, allow you to send this email. Every time you do something, I'm going to have to check it, or, I'll then start chatting to colleagues, and it turns out that the bosses spoke to the colleagues about me, and it kind of, it's a bit, I don't want to say belittling. You feel a bit more uncomfortable about it. The flip side of it is, if I'm just told, okay, we trust you, we'll leave you to it, I sometimes feel that's not supportive enough. And it's like, you're kind of just leaving me to it. And actually, I want to sort of speak with you a bit more, and I want you to be a bit more involved.
But that's about management, isn't it?
Yeah.
So one thing is that you trust people, but you still need to ping pong ideas with them. And you also need to make sure that you guide them where it's needed. But I think that's what's so interesting about Danish culture. As a manager, you expect your employee to come to you if you have a question or if you feel that there's some challenges that you can't handle alone. And that's also a trust in you as coming forward, also in terms of your weakness, in terms of skills, and saying, I am concerned with this part of the project, I don't know what to do. Can we have a brainstorm?
Next, we started discussing how this idea of trust and having a low power structure, essentially treating everyone more or less equally rather than a strict hierarchy, can be confusing for those not used to being in a Danish culture.
The first thing both Chris and Nico talked about was junior people being included in the conversation.
You see it throughout, a collaborative approach to work, to decision making, to organizing. I mean, I remember one of the very first times that I came to Stockholm, and was at head office, and I was involved in some very, very high level negotiations between the two companies. And I was a trainee, so I was just observing. I was just kind of following the vice president around, observing. And I took a break in the negotiations, and the negotiation team, they were discussing amongst themselves, and the head of it looks at me and says, Chris, what do you think? And I was just shocked. I must have said something absolutely absurd. But I mean, he looked at me and he was genuinely interested in what I thought.
He then contrasts this with when he was in Italy.
I remember having my team in Milan, and when we had, the big boss came down from Denmark or from Sweden and for a business review, and I would spend a couple of weeks, almost coaching them, not on what to say, but I said, you've got to say something. Challenge them. You have to challenge the boss. Don't just sit there and accept what he or she says.
Amazing. I think that was really cool, because actually what he's pointing out is that you as a junior in many countries abroad are not expected to chip in with your knowledge and opinion. And that was something that really came as a surprise to me when I worked in the UK. And actually, it took me a long time to realize that people didn't expect me to say something in meetings.
Do you remember a particular meeting when this happened?
I remember all the meetings, because I would be the only junior one actually chipping in with knowledge and saying what I think that the agenda should be and what I think we should do. Because Danish culture is, if you are in a meeting, you are there to chip in with knowledge, because otherwise, why are you attending? Then we're wasting time. You're there to provide knowledge and to help make decisions. And that's whether you're junior or senior. And so we think that the more people come to the table, the more you can create, the more ideas you get in.
How did your bosses respond to this? Were they like, this Josefine's got a bit of gumption? Or were they like, who brought this girl?
I think both. I think some bosses felt very provoked by this. They thought, who is she to sit here saying all of that? And I had no idea. I was oblivious to it, because it was so ingrained in my culture that if I'm in a meeting, of course I chip in. Otherwise, I shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
In fact, it would be rude not to come prepared and have some ideas.
Yeah.
And I think other bosses, they were like, wow, someone who dares to speak up. Obviously, I was working in a media and news environment. So it was already expected that you had some ideas and that you spoke up and you knew about politics and you were dedicated to to trying to communicate the world. Mm-hmm. But I think that it was half-half. I think some were very provoked by my approach.
Interesting.
And I first realized coming back to Denmark, because I felt, at one point I felt quite abnormal. I realized that I wasn't quite fitting in. And then I came back to Denmark and I realized that all of the things that I'd felt and struggled with was my cultural background.
Yeah.
And that's how people who come into Denmark feel now. And I'm very aware of that. So I've had both Americans and Danes and Italians and people from all over working on my team. And they react very different in meeting situations. And just working with them, they have different skills, they bring different things to the team, but they react very differently because of their cultural background. I've found the Americans are extremely service-minded. They really want to be there to help you being the boss, but they would not chip in at meetings. And that's not because they're not knowledgeable and creative. It's because of the structures that they're used to.
I mean, is it sort of a sense of not wanting to step on your toes, do you think? Or is it that they don't want to make you look bad? Or what is it, do you think, which means they don't necessarily come forward with all of their ideas?
Well, I think it's exactly what Nico and Chris are mentioning in their interviews, that basically you are not expected to chip in if you're junior. That's for the bosses to take the lead and to say, this is the way we're going. Yeah. And then you follow and you make sure that you support them and bring in your knowledge and skills in order to reach that goal. Yeah. And that's fantastic. It's very easy to manage people like that. I love Americans, and I love the fact that they're service-minded and they always say yes and will do, whereas the Danes on my team would be like, but why are we doing that?
Which brings us to the second point, Josefine, which is the way that Danish teams argue, or rather engage in positive conflicts. Nico explains how this is something he feels countries like the UK really struggle with.
To a lot of us, we've learned that your boss is right all the time, and you should always agree. If you want to move forward in your career, you should never, ever question your boss, which is absolutely not the case here.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a lot. What I like with working in Denmark and working with Danes is that I like to call it positive conflict.
It runs through to what in other cultures might be seen as showing weakness.
And then maybe my French background is very much like if you ask a question, if you show that you don't know, that's show weaknesses. And that's absolutely not the case in Denmark, from my experience anyway.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you should ask if you don't know. There's no shame in not knowing. And the working experience of like, you need to show that you know everything all the time. That's not only French. I think that's very much, I would say, Anglo-Saxon way of working as well. Not knowing stuff is showing weaknesses.
Which then ultimately gets us to what is the point of a boss? In Denmark, it's different to elsewhere in the world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the difference is my experience, even in working in other companies in again, Ireland, France, or whatever, same situation, different role, but somebody coming in and saying, okay, I'm going to need like an auditor with this specialty. If I ask what's this specialty, the person, the manager, the hiring manager looking at me like, okay, seriously, I'm wasting my time with you.
Yeah. Everyone in the room is just like, he brought this guy in.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And that must be quite, what's the word? I don't know. Let's just say difficult, when you might just keep inside all these, and it might be that 5 other people in the room are also thinking the same thing.
Yes.
Right? But nobody says,
and that's terrible, because you start thinking like, okay, I should not show weaknesses. I should not ask questions, right? Yeah. But trust breeds trust. When you start like being, you know what? It's okay. It's okay if I don't know. It's okay to ask. And it just, you build such a better relationship with people from the start.
I think it's really interesting what Nico is mentioning there. And I think that is exactly what the challenge is when you come in from abroad and have to manage a Danish team, because you would feel very undermined when people start asking questions as to why you say what you say, or start arguing your point or your case. And actually they do so in order for us together to be able to create something good out of it.
It seems to be like the reason you might criticize an idea is the pursuit of truth. So it's like you're doing this because we all want to get to this, what is the answer? Whereas I certainly find, again, maybe it's just a thing that I've had, but if I'm in the UK and somebody gives some quote unquote constructive criticism, it's like I feel personally attacked. I'm like, okay, the reason you're criticizing my idea, that means you think I'm an idiot. And therefore, this sort of fear of being seen as an idiot in the workplace means I don't want to come up and I don't want to sort of be vulnerable and I don't want to say these things which I don't admit that I might be wrong to my colleagues. There's very much this idea of being the person to seem to come up with the ideas and this idea of like, oh my God, if I show any weakness, I'm going to be seen as the idiot and I'm going to get looked over on the promotion.
And actually, the way we see it in Denmark is that we all help each other being our very best, whether you're the boss or the employee. We all try to bring in constructive ideas so that we can together as a team produce the very best.
So get this right, this only works if you trust that everybody's doing their best.
Yeah, and they have your best interest at heart. So of course, and that's also the difficulty of management, that you need to create a trusting environment where everyone wants to do their best and they want their colleagues to do the best, because then together we'll have success and that will help each and every individual in that team.
Yeah.
I think that generally management is about this, and it would be that across the world. It's just more intense in Denmark because people are chipping in with their ideas. They're bringing in criticism, which is meant constructively, but can feel extremely uncomfortable if it can hit your confidence if you don't already know that actually it's good enough what you're doing and it's expected that we ping pong around what is the very best solution.
Okay, well, I think this is quite a good point for us to take a little detour away from Denmark and go to Japan.
Sounds interesting.
Yes. So at this point, we'll bring in our third guest, also called Josefine. She and a fellow student worked as architect interns in a remote Japanese island for 8 months. And in her words,
I would go as far as say that all the meetings that I attended during my time in Japan were incredibly challenging for me to understand how the communication between us and the boss were.
One of the instances where she and her colleagues would clash was at lunchtime. Everyone ate together in this big central canteen, and then things would get awkward.
We would obviously clean up after ourselves, so we would bring the dishes and whatsoever to the dishwasher and start cleaning. But here it was actually a big clash, so we would end up more or less dancing around each other, trying to help, not help, and I don't know.
After a few weeks, they were called into the office.
We had a very, very serious meeting after, I think, 3 months at the island. Our what is that in English? You know, when you translate. Our translator, yeah, our translator. Yeah, she called us in for a meeting, and she asked us to sit down, and she said, "I'm very sorry about this, but we'll have to go through this list." And she actually booked a meeting, so we knew in advance that this was something very serious. And my colleague and I were pretty sure that they were going to fire us because of some. Because of some big deal or something, and we didn't even know what that would be, but we were pretty sure that this was the end of everything. And we ended up sitting for 2 hours, and slowly but steady we understood that this was just a question of us not doing the dishwashers, but this was a huge issue for them, and they were incredibly afraid of making us uncomfortable. So this is like a big deal in Japan, that avoiding uncomfortable. Yeah, exactly.
They were in the meeting for 2 hours. Josefine said that she was confused because the translator, the one giving the meeting, kept talking around the issue but never said it explicitly. It eventually clicked, though, that what Josefine and her friend should do is just leave the dirty dishes on the table once they were finished.
I think it was a question of taking their job. They were afraid that by having us doing the dishes, we would more or less underestimate their position as waiters and waitresses in the cafe, and it would make them look lazy, I guess, something like that. So that we should understand that we had a specific position in the office, and they had their specific position, and we should keep a clear distance.
So I think it's really interesting here what my fellow Josefine is saying, and I've obviously been based in South Africa for quite a few years, and actually there we often saw the same happening, particularly when Europeans came to South Africa. They would have a more flat way of acting, meaning that they would feel bad if they did not help the servants. And there were a lot of servants, and these servants were extremely proud of their work. They were professionals within their job. And if people started taking the dishes or trying to help them, for them, it would feel as if they were not doing a good job.
It was like undermining.
It was undermining. And basically, we made that mistake too, because I felt bad that someone was cleaning my house for me. And actually, I was very uncomfortable with having a servant. The house that we moved into, which was a corporate let, was basically, it came with servants. And first, we actually discussed, my husband and I, whether we could just get rid of them, because we'd rather them just clean up after ourselves. And we also thought, well, our children have to learn that they make their own bed and so on. But then it turned out that if we let go of this servant, it would mean that she had nowhere to live. It would mean she didn't have a job. It would mean that her son couldn't go to the school he was going to. So, of course, we decided to keep them on when we realized that that's actually the impact we would have if we didn't stay there. And it then took a while for us to get used to the fact that actually the lady working there, you would normally call them a housekeeper maybe, but the housekeeper working there was extremely proud of what she was doing for our family. And she was also really happy doing the dishes and doing the cleaning. And if I tried to chip in with any ideas, that was a way of undermining her. And I actually tried to pass that knowledge on to other Europeans coming to South Africa who were trying to either give them less to do or basically trying to take over their job by saying, no, I can do that part, you do that, by sort of dividing and conquering together, because that's just not the way that society works.
Yeah. I mean, it's carbon copy in Kenya, same thing. And when I then moved back to Denmark, I'd forgotten how to use a washing machine. So I had to suddenly do my own laundry for the first time in 3 years.
That was tough.
Yeah, so I was like, how does this thing work? It does have its flip sides on it.
Another thing that I experienced in South Africa was that obviously people, because they took pride in having a job, there's a lot of unemployment there. And then having a kind of uniform that shows that you have this role was kind of important. And so that means that the nannies and housekeepers, servants and so on, they would also have uniforms. And that felt very wrong to a Dane, to put a uniform on someone who was just looking after my house. And I actually kept saying, hey, I'll just buy you some new outfits that are comfortable to clean in, and then you can wear those. And, that will be much nicer for you. Because I felt that in a way that having this uniform on made this person look like something less than me, or at least they should service me.
It certainly would have led to a distinction between you. And I think a big thing in Denmark is, we said at the beginning, everyone dresses very casually. This idea of fundamentally people are the same. We're just people, so therefore we should dress the same. And
exactly.
Then having this thing does make that difference. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We are all equals, basically, and that's extremely important to Denmark. And I think most Europeans, but even Denmark more than anywhere else. So it felt wrong that she should wear this uniform.
That clearly marks her out.
That clearly marks that she is servicing me and my family. But then it turned out that when I was trying to take her shopping to go get other things, she really wanted the real uniform that all the other nannies had, because they felt proud of their job. They were proud going into the streets, shopping, taking their bus and so on, wearing this uniform, because that showed that they had a job and that they were working hard to make a living and earn money for their family. There was a lot of prestige in this uniform. And so, what do we learn from that? We learn that we should be more open-minded and not bring too much of our own culture to new places. And that's difficult, but it takes time. And I think we need to be very humble when we arrive in a new place.
Back in Denmark, it feels like we have a decent sense of what Danish management is and looks like. If you're Danish or have been here for many years, then you might find yourself saying, well, yeah, obviously things like a flat hierarchy are great, and it would be awkward if we didn't offer to clear up the dishes together. However, coming into Denmark with a different cultural framework, it can actually feel a bit disorientating. First, we'll look at things from the employee perspective.
It's the framework, the freedom, the trust and everything. They're like, what do you mean you're not telling me what to do? What do you mean there's no hardcore KPIs on where do I need to be at the end of the month and everything? What do you mean you're asking me an opinion? I'm not supposed to have an opinion. I'm supposed to just do what I'm told.
And that's a turn-off for a lot of people.
Yes, I think some people are not capable of working outside of this framework. As simple as this.
Okay.
And I'm not saying there's right or wrong. It's just I mean, I've seen this in a lot of organizations.
How do they? Sorry, how are those people interpreting what's going on? As in, are they like, okay, well, I'm coming here and I'm just not getting the support or direction?
No, I think they're like, there's no strong leadership, there's no direction, it's not strong. It's not. Yeah. I feel we're weak. It's not the red way of management. What works in the army, what works in those kind of societies, right? It's not here. Here, it's very much like it works on trust, but that means you need to be able to trust yourself.
This idea of weak leadership. I found this point fascinating that Nico said, because it's all well and good saying, as you say, it's good to be trusted. But until he said that, it didn't really click what it can look like from the other side, which is if you're going to your boss and saying, cool, right, boss, what are we doing? And the boss is like, well, I don't know. Well, let's have a chat. And you're like, who is this guy? Like, who is this girl? Who is this person? Like, what's the point of them being here if they're not even going to tell us what to do or get things going? And I can see that being quite a struggle for people.
And if you turn that around, basically, as a boss, I would think that if I'm saying, well, how should we do this? And if you did not have an opinion or an idea that you could chip in with, I would be like, why are you on my team? Obviously, you don't have anything to bring to the table, so you shouldn't be here. I expect something from each individual. Mm-hmm. But of course, it's difficult because it's about management style. But that was now bringing me back to England, where I would sit there chipping in with ideas while the senior people were probably thinking, goodness, I mean, she's junior. Why the heck is she sitting here bringing in her ideas? She's just supposed to listen and then go and act accordingly.
Yeah, and just do what she's told.
Exactly. So they probably thought that, whereas I thought, well, I'm at the meeting, so I'm chipping in with ideas. And why are my colleagues sitting here around me saying nothing? They're wasting our time. They should be out there working if they have nothing to add to this meeting. But basically, just coming back to that, I think that it's still difficult for me to understand how people can sit and be quiet if they have something to add to a meeting.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was thinking about this a bit, and I don't know. I think if you sort of feel quite confident in the idea and you feel it's going to make you look good, then I'd put my hand up and I'd say, we've thought about doing this cool, innovative idea. But if it's sort of, gosh, I actually don't really feel 100% comfortable in doing this task, then I'd much rather just Google it and spend a couple of hours trying to, or maybe talk to my colleagues on my same level to try and figure out what it is, so that when I go to the boss, the only impression they're getting from me is positive things. Oh, Sam's been able to sort this out. Sam can get stuff done.
So you can be a self-starter and you can do stuff, but you'd be much more careful with raising your
exactly. I wouldn't then, because I've had experiences where I've gone to the boss and I've sort of said, okay, well, I'm trying to do this Excel formula or something, or I'm trying to build this report, and and he or she would say, okay, well, I mean, I'll show you what it is, or like, why are you asking me this? I told you this last week, or isn't it obvious? Or again, maybe I'm not being completely fair with them, but this idea of if I show weakness, the manager's then got this doubt of like, actually, maybe Sam's not that competent. Okay, we've got this promotion coming up. Maybe we should put it over to someone else. And I think this idea of I'm not 100% sure how to do my job, but I won't go to my boss, is like something which is really quite deeply ingrained in me. And so coming to Denmark, admittedly I don't have a boss here, but talking to people who have talking to non-Danes who have bosses, this can feel really vulnerable to sort of go to your boss and say, I'm not really sure about how to do this, or what do you think about this, or whatever. And everything that I've heard you and other people say is bosses want that because it shows you're committed, it shows you're vested in this thing. And so I think the main takeaway for me is sort of, if you're coming in as a non-Dane, just perhaps have that leap of faith that the more you engage with your boss and the more you perhaps show what you're unsure about, is actually not going to lead to
you looking weak.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally. Yeah, I think that's exactly the way. And I think that also Danish managers and leaders can learn a lot from listening to this, because actually they might take for granted that people come in, and if they have a challenge, they will ask questions and they will say, I'm struggling here, but they might not, because they're worried about their job and they think that it will show weakness or they will seem incompetent.
That's really, I mean, for me at least, that was it. Do not want to seem incompetent by raising this thing which I don't know. Yeah.
And that's exactly, I think, every manager's fear, that people don't say if they have a problem, because then you can't solve it. You can't fix something you don't know is there. And you know, you can maybe see people are struggling, but they don't say anything. Then you think, oh my goodness, I mean, that's exactly when you're not sure about your employee or your team member. What I've actually experienced myself in terms of trying to manage a multicultural team is giving the different team members projects and then seeing how they chip in through that instead of only through pitching things at meetings and discussing at meetings. So for example, by saying, hey, we have this project, why don't you make a presentation and a proposal as to how we can do it? And there I've often been very surprised at how non-Danes really shone, because they'd done an amazing presentation. They were able to do things I didn't know they were able to do, but they'd obviously felt too junior to mention that they had these skills. And maybe they even felt uncomfortable showing those skills off, because they felt maybe I would feel undermined as a leader because I didn't know how to do it. But the whole reason why I'd brought them in was that they knew to do things that I didn't know how to do.
I've got to say, I can't, for the life of me, say, in doing researching this episode, I found this study which said, do you think the boss should know how to do the job of the employees? Like, in terms of the tasks that the employees have to do, should the boss be able to do them? Guess what percentage of people said yes in, I think, Italy is, guess what percentage of people said yes, the manager should be able to do the tasks of the people they manage.
Yeah, so basically the idea that the manager should be the very best at the task, that's why they're managing you. 90%, I'd say, in Italy.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was like 60%. It was very high.
Yeah.
What do you think it was in Denmark?
10.
Yeah, 7%.
Yeah.
And I totally feel it. With a lot of the bosses I had, it's like, I don't know how to build this Excel report, or I don't know how to do this. And I go to the boss and I'm like, oh, yeah, cool, this is how you do it. And you sort of have this almost, I don't know.
You look up to the boss.
Familial thing of like, this is the boss, and this I'm here to learn from the boss, and they've got all this worldly experience, and I'm getting skills directly from them. And so that was kind of the mindset I had. And then coming here, and you hear people say, well, I don't know how to do it, you tell me.
Yeah, you feel very disappointed coming here because you come here thinking that the boss is a great person who knows it all and you can learn from them. But actually, they've hired you because you had that skill.
Yeah.
So you have to chip in with your knowledge in that team.
We'll talk a bit now about non-Danish managers' struggle. And we've spoken about it quite a lot, actually. I'll play this one clip from Chris.
I mean, as a manager or have staff responsibilities, that can always be a challenge. You know, I was expected when I first came, staff responsibilities, and expected, I was the boss. I expected people to listen to what I said, but it didn't work like that. You know, well, I mean, it basically, so it was kind of like herding cats in a way. But I would say that, I would say, okay, we're going to do this, and then they just look like, why? Well, I said because we're going to do this. And they said, but that doesn't make any sense. Why would you do that? And then people start discussing. And, at the end, again, they know I'm the boss, and the boss is the boss and makes the decision. But people expect to be heard.
Both of these interviews, the things which people struggled with was people asking why the whole time. And I think a big thing that often Nico was saying, particularly for tech startup people, is that they're very used to coming in and saying, right, I'm the boss, I've got a plan, we're going to execute on the plan. You want to do part A, part B, part C, go, go, go. And people just going back saying, why? No, we don't need to do that. Can't we do this? Can't we do this? And a lot of people just struggle because they're like, how do I work when just people won't just, not quite follow the orders, but like, I've come in, I've got this expertise, I know how to build a product, let's do it.
In tech or product, their framework is very much like they would come in because obviously very good skills and working for very good organization. And they come in and absolutely not ready to work in that framework of like, what do you mean my employees are supposed to have an opinion? What do you mean I'm supposed to explain what we have to do? Or if I want everyone engaged, I need to, that's the frame, that's our goal, and how we're going to do it for the next 6 months. What do you mean I just don't tell people what to do?
And that's where leadership comes in, because you can't just be the boss telling people what they have to do in Denmark. You have to have the why, and you have to be able to be persuasive. You almost have to pitch every idea and say, this is the idea, why we're doing it, any questions? And then people say, why are we doing it this way? Could we not do it that way? And then you basically need to be able to have the debate, but also to be able to say, this is why, and be persuasive enough for them to then go for it. Because if they don't buy in to the reason why you're doing it, then they won't do well with it as Danes. Because Danish people, they want to have a reason to do stuff. Mm-hmm. And that's only by seeing, okay, I get the point. Yeah. So you have to get the point. You have to understand the idea. So as a leader, you have to be a visionary here, and you have to be able to put your vision across persuasively.
I think a lot of people just find it's a waste of time, Josefine. They're like, why do I need to paint a picture of the world? Like, I've come here to do a job, just do the job.
Like, we could go much faster, especially because, again, I'm talking startups, right? That's my experience here. So it's startup, it's all about speed. And like, how are we supposed to go as fast as this if I'm supposed to try to engage everyone and align with everyone on the conversation?
But that's not the way the Danes work. They want to know why, and they believe that they have valuable insights to bring to the table. And so even if you don't use the insights, you should hear people as a manager. Otherwise, people will not thrive in your team.
And this idea of people are sort of, I'm happy to have these disagreements, but we at least need to agree that we're going in this one particular direction.
And you can have that as soon as everyone has been heard and that you've had the debate. Yeah. So the debate, we can't live without in Denmark. So basically, any foreigner who comes here, they need to be ready for that. Just as well as any manager who goes abroad from Denmark, they need to understand that they have to set the direction and they have to basically give everybody the knowledge they need in order to execute on the idea without expecting them to chip in very much.
Despite this, both Chris and Nico, the outsiders coming in, are fully on board with the Danish/Nordic style of management.
Chris's whole book that you can actually read about on the What the Denmark website is advocating that the Viking style of leadership is not only a good thing now, but increasingly in the future. It's a methodology that organizations around the world, they will need to start adopting.
The central thesis is that the world is changing at an accelerating pace. It's crazy to think that one person or a select group of people can hold all of the answers, and therefore we need to build management structures and cultures that incorporate and truly get input from the many. The question some of you might be thinking is, well, that's all well and good coming from happy little Denmark, where there's generations of people who trust each other by default. But what can I do if I want a bit of this Viking management style in my organisation? Despair not, says Chris. It is totally possible to import this style for yourself.
And I think if you're in a position in an organization where you can influence that culture and mindset, it can be implemented. It is without question transferable. It is exportable.
Okay.
Who doesn't want to be trusted? Who doesn't want to be listened to? Who doesn't want to be respected? Of course, you have to make adjustments for different cultures and in this year, internationalizing any organization or company. You always have to make considerations to the culture that you grew up in. But those basic characteristics on leadership and humanity are universal.
So practically speaking, you create a subculture for your team and decide the rules. I've even heard of some teams, especially international or cross-cultural ones, that go so far as having a written constitution where everyone agrees to how they'll work together.
For example, when we give feedback, it's about the idea and not the person. If feedback sounds negative, it's because we want to challenge and develop it, not make the other person look stupid. And before making a big decision, we will make sure that everyone understands the why. This last one brings in Nico's favourite phrase.
I like that sentence. We don't need to agree, we need to align. The idea is to align, right? And to explain why suggestion A is what we're going to go for.
Making sure people are heard not only increases the input and insight you get in the business, but it means people feel more bought in.
Whilst it may seem long-winded in the short run, having a team who are aligned on what to do and feel comfortable speaking openly about their concerns will surely lead to a better outcome. Or at least that's the view of Nico and Chris. So, what have we learnt? Yes, each person and manager is their own individual unique snowflake, but there are cultural differences in the Nordic or Viking style of leadership to other parts of the world. Having trust that your colleagues have your best interests is the foundation of this style, which fosters an environment where everyone can contribute ideas and reach the optimal outcome as opposed to a top-down approach.
If you're a Dane working in an organization with a new non-Dane, perhaps make the effort to over-communicate. Something as obvious as, well, if she isn't sure about something, then they'll ask, might not be the case if coming from a culture where admitting you don't know something is a sign of weakness.
And if you're a non-Dane, try and tell yourself when someone gives you constructive feedback, they are probably just trying to develop the idea rather than make you out to be an idiot. Easier said than done.
As always, if you have any feedback on the show or would like to share some ideas of your own, please contribute to our Facebook group by searching for What the Denmark. You can also read extensive notes, including links that we mentioned on whatthedenmark.com.
A big thanks to our guests and everyone who helped in the show. Vi snakkes næste gang. Thanks to everyone who has helped in the creation of this episode, including David Dolyak, Guki Gunes-Shuvali, Reke Campbell, Andreas Poulsen, Kevin Mose, and Tevin Sudi.
We hope you enjoyed the show. We're still early in our journey of resolving cultural confusion in Denmark and would love for you to join us by subscribing to the show on your podcast app. If you like this episode, please consider telling a friend about it, and you can also head over to www.whatthedenmark.com to receive our newsletter. Thanks for listening. I'm Josefine Bols.
And I'm Sam Floy.
Can we do that one again with more lay down? Like, vi snakkes næste gang.
Okay.
It gets really quick.
Okay, sure.
Vi snakkes næste gang.
Vi snakkes
næste gang. Vi snakkes næste gang.
Vi snakkes næste gang.
Yeah. Cool, okay.